In a noisy world, the strong choose silence. Try pausing for a few seconds and listen to the world around you. Do you hear anything? No, it's not the birds singing or the wind blowing. It's the sound of people. Millions of voices rising every day, shouting, arguing, justifying, boasting, all tangled in an endless storm of words. From heated debates on social media and real-life quarrels to the countless inner voices pressuring you to speak, to respond, to explain, like if you don't say something, you'll become invisible. But is that true? This world doesn't lack voices, it lacks silence. We live in an era where anyone can speak, but few have the calm to listen, even to themselves. Have you ever felt exhausted, not from overwork, but from constantly needing to prove yourself? Explaining why you declined an invitation, responding when someone misunderstands you, justifying something that didn't need explaining, only because you're afraid of being judged. Aren't you tired? Stoicism, the philosophy of steady souls, doesn't teach us how to win with words. It doesn't give us the tools to triumph in every argument. Instead, it teaches us something simple, yet hardest to do, to focus on the only thing we can control, ourselves. A Stoic doesn't seek applause from the crowd. They seek peace from within. Epictetus once said, "The more we value things outside our control, the less control we have. The more we cling to what's external, others' opinions, approval, praise, defense, the more we lose our self-mastery." Meanwhile, to a Stoic, silence isn't weakness. It is an invisible strength, a flame that burns quietly, needing no witness to exist. When you choose silence, you're not giving up. You're simply stepping out of the whirlpool of petty emotions to preserve a space within that no one can touch. Silence gives you distance, to see what truly matters. Silence gives you time to respond with reason instead of impulse. And silence gives you freedom, not to live by scripts others have written, like a still lake at dawn, calm, quiet, yet deep enough to reflect the entire sky. The silence of a Stoic is not avoidance, but a deliberate choice to keep the soul untainted by the world's noise, chaos, and ignorance. Silence, silence, silence. Not because you are powerless, but because you've chosen to master your emotions. You don't need the world to understand you. You only need to know who you are. And sometimes that silence becomes the most powerful statement of all, echoing louder than 1,000 justifications. Silence is the clearest answer. When you stop arguing, stop explaining, stop trying to be right, the world begins to feel something unfamiliar, a void. A void not noisy, but heavy, like a soaring symphony suddenly missing a low note. The listener doesn't know why, but senses the depth is gone. That is the effect of conscious absence, and that is the subtle power of a Stoic. Have you ever written a long message filled with reason and sincerity? You poured into it a longing to be understood, heard, acknowledged. But then, all you received was silence, cold and indifferent. In that moment, didn't you feel smaller, like a candle flickering out in the wind? The more we try to justify, the more we explain, we often fail to notice. We are dimming our inner light. Stoicism doesn't promote extreme silence, but it teaches us to know when to be silent to preserve our dignity. Because words aren't always the path to understanding. Sometimes silence is the sharpest mirror, revealing the truth of a person more clearly than hundreds of words ever could. He who does not understand your silence will probably not understand your words. Elbert Hubbard. If someone cannot understand your stillness, they will not be sensitive enough to grasp the meaning behind your words. At that point, every explanation becomes an emotional waste. So you don't need to speak up about everything. You don't need to respond to every offense. You don't need to clarify every little misunderstanding. Let silence be the shield that protects your worth from pointless erosion. Let the pause in conversation become a space where others must face themselves. Let your absence be the most striking reply. Not showing up doesn't mean weakness. Saying nothing doesn't mean defeat. It simply means you no longer wish to trade your peace for an unworthy argument. Stillness at times is the last defense of the self-respecting. And for a Stoic, it is not retreat, it is a step inward, toward the depths of the soul where no one can reach but you. If you've ever been hurt by unanswered words, remember, you don't always have to speak to be respected. Sometimes your silence is the loudest wake-up call. Silence to see the truth. Have you ever found yourself misunderstood, judged, or pulled into a conversation you weren't ready for? You feel tongue-tied, your mind tightens, and questions flood in. Do I need to explain? Will they understand? The usual response is to justify, to send a clarifying message, or to recount the story to someone else in search of empathy. But in the end, you're left drained, because words often aren't strong enough to fix the way people choose to perceive you. A Stoic chooses a different path. They remain silent, not out of helplessness, but because they understand. If we react while emotions are in control, we'll only speak from impulse, not from truth. They step back, they observe, they give time for the dust to settle, like letting mud sink to the bottom so the water clears, revealing what's truly there. In this case, silence isn't an escape. It's a way to retain control. You don't let others dictate your reaction. You don't let fleeting emotion ruin your clarity. In that pause, you begin to discern what is truth and what is just someone else's emotional projection. What's worth learning from and what's not worth your peace. Like when someone attacks you at work. Instead of firing back, you stay silent. You wait until you're clear enough to ask, is there any truth in this criticism? Or is it simply someone else's frustration being thrown at me? In silence, you don't lose your voice. You're choosing what deserves a reply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Stillness helps you reclaim that judgment. You don't react from agitation, you respond, if needed, from a place of ripened understanding. Silence is how the strong reserve their energy for what matters. They don't speak just because someone expects them to. They don't explain to be understood at all costs. They know some things are meant to pass in silence. Some people, if they can't understand your stillness, will never understand your words. In stillness, you begin to hear yourself. You're no longer caught in the noise, no longer chasing approval. And in that very moment, you realize what truly defines you and what was merely a fleeting emotional illusion. Rejecting closure, choosing inner freedom. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from the initial shock, but from not being able to accept that you may never get an explanation. Have you ever felt that? After a breakup, the collapse of a relationship or a friendship that vanished without a trace? You text, you ask why, hoping for even a single reply. But all you receive is silence. A silence so cold it makes you feel unworthy of even a final word. We call it closure, a clear ending, a decent goodbye, a rational explanation. But you know what's ironic? The more you demand closure from someone else, the more you hand them control over your emotions. Every time you text, "Where did I go wrong?" you place your identity in someone else's hands. And when they don't reply, you spiral into doubt, self-blame, and helplessness. Stoicism does not agree with this. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." A Stoic understands that closure doesn't come from someone else's words, but from an internal decision. I choose to end this, not because they clarified things, but because I've understood enough to no longer need more. After parting, the Stoic doesn't chase the question, why? They don't dig through old messages or dissect expressions for clues. They step back. They hurt, but they let the pain pass in silence without needing the other person to witness it. They ask themselves, what hurt me the most in this? Was it not being heard? Was it a feeling that I wasn't enough? And in that moment, healing begins, not from an answer outside, but from honesty within. Because when you stop waiting for closure, you finally open to freedom. When you no longer need a final word, you can walk forward with your head high. You stop saying, I need them to respond, and start saying, I've chosen to stop here. Silence then is no longer weakness. It becomes sovereign closure. Not everyone will give you a beautiful ending, but you can write yourself a strong one. You don't need anyone's permission to heal. You hold the key, and silence is the most decisive act to close an old chapter and begin a new one. with dignity, clarity, and freedom. Not reacting makes falsehood reveal itself. There are truths you don't have to chase. Just stop speaking, stop reacting, and they will surface on their own. Because while words can disguise, silent actions cannot. Have you ever believed in beautiful promises, only to see them vanish like morning mist? They once said they'd never leave. They swore they'd understand you, respect you. But when hardship came, when you went silent out of pain, they disappeared without a word. That silence is not defeat. It is a mirror. And that mirror doesn't distort anything. It simply reflects the truth long hidden beneath charming words. When you stop replying, stop explaining, stop pleading for understanding, a space begins to form. A space without loud justifications, without polished rhetoric. And there, deceit has nowhere left to hide. In a workplace argument, you don't need to shout to be right. A Stoic knows that truth doesn't need to scream. They step back, observe, letting others' words contradict themselves, letting small gestures, eyes, tone, posture, reveal what words conceal. They don't need to expose or retaliate because, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "What you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." That's why grounded people don't talk much. They know the sincere will remain, even in silence. The fake will slip away with nothing left to cling to. In a noisy world, deceivers need a stage. But when you pull down the curtain, switch off the lights, and stop responding, they lose their audience and don't know who to perform for anymore. And you don't need to raise your voice to prove anything. You don't need apologies to move forward. What you need is clarity in behavior, not words that soothe for a moment. And you only begin to see that when you step back into silence. Because ultimately, silence doesn't make you weaker. It gives you weight. It makes you someone who is not easily manipulated. And it grants you something the noisy world deeply fears: inner power. Not explaining is the highest form of confidence. There's a quiet exhaustion we've all felt. The ache of being misunderstood. You explain. You message. You open up, laying out reasons with sincerity. But in return, just a cold glance, a dismissive shake of the head, or worse, a deliberate silence. You believe that the more you explain, the more they'll understand. But the truth is, the more you try to justify, the more you bind yourself to their assumptions. And the most painful part, many people don't want to understand, they just want to be right. A Stoic doesn't live that way. They don't ask permission to be themselves. They don't wait for someone's approval to feel whole. They stand like a mountain, unshaken by passing winds. When misunderstood, they don't shout. They let time and action speak. They know, those who truly observe will see. Those who only want to judge will never listen, no matter what you say. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Don't waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors." True confidence doesn't come from praise or validation. It comes from knowing who you are and acting in alignment with that, even when no one sees, no one cheers. At work, you may be misread, your efforts twisted. But instead of defending, you stay quiet. You focus on doing your part well. And the outcome, not your explanation, becomes the loudest truth. Those who don't see your value aren't meant to walk with you. Those who need you to explain to be accepted never truly respected you. Confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't say, "I'm okay." It's the calm you feel when entering a room full of misunderstanding and still living by your values. That's when you realize, no one defines you but you. You don't need to persuade. Don't need to apologize for living authentically. And in a world increasingly obsessed with appearances, keeping that quiet strength is an act of courage. A silent declaration, "I am free." Silence is the strongest closure. Have you ever felt drained just trying to make someone understand you? You type long messages, spend hours crafting the right words, soft, reasonable, kind. You endure, explain, even shrink yourself to maintain a relationship that was never truly valued. And what do you get in return? Avoidance, denial, or worse, a silence laced with contempt. It's in that moment you realize, words are worthless if the listener isn't sincere. So you begin to choose what Stoics have always chosen: silence. Your silence is not surrender, it is growth. A turning point where you stop being a hostage to others' expectations. A quiet declaration that you've lived enough to know what isn't worth holding on to and who isn't worth speaking to. A Stoic doesn't seek to win arguments. They don't need the last word to prove their worth. They step back, not out of weakness, but wisdom. Because true value does not need noise to be real. It stands like a lighthouse in the storm, unshaken, unshouting, but radiant. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You can't control others' reactions, but you can master your inner peace. And sometimes, silence is how you protect that peace. From a world loud with ego and games. Remember the last time you were dismissed, twisted, or belittled. A Stoic doesn't fight, plead, or beg. They simply walk away, with their head held high. Not out of pride, but clarity. The most dignified goodbye needs no words. That quiet departure is the most complete answer. And that silence, in truth, speaks louder than any accusation. It forces others to face themselves, their words, their choices, and the space they've left. And sometimes that emptiness haunts more than any spoken regret. You don't need to scream to show you're hurting. You don't need to prove you were right. You don't need to drag out a perfect ending. Because your silence, if born of awareness, is already the most powerful statement of dignity, of self-respect, of a freedom no one can steal. And when you walk away in quiet, without blame, it's not just an ending. It's the beginning of a steadier, freer, unshakable you.